In today's modern world of technology, communication has never been easier. With a single tap, a voice can cross cities, states, even continents in seconds. We call our families without thinking twice. We text friends casually. We assume help is always just a call away. But sometimes, a phone call is not just a convenience. Sometimes, it is the final lifeline between life and death. Around the world, the people who live with this truth every day are emergency dispatchers. They are trained to stay calm, to listen, to guide, to save. Yet despite their training, there are moments that stay with them forever. Moments when help arrives just in time, and moments when it doesn't. Moments that end not with sirens or relief, but with silence. A silence so heavy it lingers long after the call disconnects. These are not legends. There are no reenactments, no exaggerations. These are real emergency calls. And these are the ones that still haunt the operators who answered them. One of those calls belonged to a 16-year-old boy named Kyle Plush. Kyle was a sophomore at Seven Hills School in Cincinnati, Ohio. To anyone who knew him, he was just like any other teenager. Kind, intelligent, driven, and full of quiet determination. He loved sports, especially tennis. He had goals, dreams, a future that stretched far beyond high school hallways and parking lots. But on April 10th, 2018, that future was taken from him in a way no one could have imagined. It was around 3 p.m. when Kyle arrived at school in his family's gold 2004 Honda Odyssey minivan. He had a tennis match to attend that afternoon. Teammates were already gathering. Coaches were preparing. Life was moving forward, normally, quietly, without warning. Kyle parked his car and realized his tennis gear was still in the back of the van. Something he'd done countless times before. He opened the rear, climbed inside, and stretched past the folded seats to reach his equipment. And then, in a sudden and catastrophic moment, everything went wrong. Without warning, the rear seat mechanism malfunctioned. The heavy seat snapped backward violently, throwing Kyle off balance. In a split second, he was hurled into the trunk area, pinned upside down. The seat collapsed onto his chest and neck, trapping him under nearly 70 pounds of pressure. Kyle was stuck. His body twisted. His lungs compressed. Breathing became painful, then terrifyingly difficult. He tried to push the seat away, but his strength faded quickly. Panic set in. His heart raced. Every second felt heavier than the last. No one could see him. No one could hear him. And the school parking lot was just steps away. Yet even in unbearable pain and rising fear, Kyle did something remarkable. He didn't give up. He didn't freeze. He used his voice. Unable to reach his phone with his hands, Kyle activated Siri and called 911. At 3:16 p.m., the first call connected. On the other end of the line was a dispatcher, trained, alert, unaware of how fragile this moment was. Kyle's voice came through muffled, faint, broken by gasps and movement. He was struggling to breathe, struggling to be understood. Fragments of words slipped through the call. "I'm stuck. I'm in my van. I'm at Seven Hills." The dispatcher asked for clarity, for an address, for confirmation. Kyle's breathing grew more labored, his words more desperate. And then, through the distortion and panic, he said the sentence that would later echo around the world. "I'm at Seven Hills. I'm going to die here." Officers were immediately dispatched. At 3:26 p.m., 2 police officers arrived at the school parking lot. For 11 minutes, they searched. They walked. They scanned the area for signs of distress. But Kyle was invisible, hidden inside the vehicle, silent beneath the weight of metal and upholstery. They found nothing. They left. Inside the minivan, time dragged on mercilessly. Kyle was still alive, still conscious, still fighting. At 3:35 p.m., Kyle made a second 911 call. This time, his voice was weaker, but clearer. He managed to describe the vehicle. A gold Honda Odyssey, 2004. He tried to explain where he was trapped. "I'm stuck in my van." Mid-sentence, his voice faltered. "I probably." The words never finished. The call ended. As minutes turned into hours, Kyle's body slowly shut down. The pressure restricted his breathing. Oxygen deprivation took hold. Alone, frightened, and unheard, Kyle Plush died in a school parking lot, while help had been so painfully close. 6 hours later, his parents reported him missing. It was not until much later that Kyle was found, exactly where he had said he was. The realization shattered everyone involved. The operators, the officers, the community, and especially his family. Kyle's story is not just a tragedy of malfunctioning equipment or miscommunication. It is a haunting reminder of how fragile life can be, and how even in a world of advanced technology, timing and understanding mean everything. Kyle did everything right. He stayed calm. He called for help. He gave information. He fought until he couldn't anymore. And that is what makes this story so devastating and so important. Because behind every emergency call is a human being, a beating heart, a voice hoping someone is listening. Kyle Plush's voice was heard, but not understood in time. And that is why, years later, his call still echoes, not just in recordings, but in the minds of those who answered. And in a world that learned, too late, just how close help truly was. I don't have much time left, so tell my mom I love her if I die. Those are not words anyone should ever hear, especially not from a frightened, innocent young person who still believes help is on the way. Those words aren't dramatic. They aren't exaggerated. They are the sound of a human being realizing they may not survive the next few hours. Kyle Plush never intended to say goodbye that day. It began as an ordinary afternoon. School had ended. The parking lot was filled with the usual chaos, students laughing, engines starting, doors slamming shut. Kyle climbed into his gold Honda Odyssey minivan, unaware that a single moment would trap him inside a nightmare. A mechanical failure caused one of the seats to fold unexpectedly, pinning him in place. At first, there was panic, but panic still comes with hope. Hope that someone will hear you. Hope that help will arrive. Kyle did exactly what he was taught to do. He called 911. 911. What is the address of your emergency? Kyle tried to explain, his voice shaky, breath uneven. The signal was poor. His words came through broken, distorted. He struggled to stay calm while his body was being crushed, circulation slowing, air growing thinner by the minute. Anyone there? I can't hear what you're saying. His skin was changing color. His muscles were weakening. The pressure was unbearable, but Kyle held on, forcing himself to stay conscious. He described the color, the make, the model of the vehicle. He gave landmarks. He did everything right. But somewhere between the call center and the officers on the ground, something went wrong. The most important information, the information that could have saved his life, was never relayed. At 3:37 p.m., officers standing just minutes away closed the incident. No distress was found. No cries were heard. And so they left, continuing their shift, unaware that a young man was still trapped, still suffering, still believing someone would come. Inside the minivan, time stretched cruelly. Kyle made another desperate call. This is not a joke. This is not a joke. I'm trapped inside my gold Honda Odyssey van in the staff parking lot of Seven Hills School. Send officers immediately. I'm almost dead. Fear had turned into clarity, the terrifying kind. The kind where you understand what's happening, but your body can no longer fight back. That's when Kyle said the words that would haunt millions who later heard the recording. I probably don't have much time left. Tell my mom I love her if I die. Hours passed. Sunlight faded into evening. The parking lot emptied. Silence took over. At 9 p.m., nearly 6 hours after Kyle's first call for help, his father, Ronald Plush, found him. Not police. Not paramedics. A father. No parent should ever have to find their child like that. No explanation can soften that moment. Kyle was gone, but the questions were just beginning. How did this happen? How was help so close, yet unreachable? How did a system designed to save lives fail so completely? On the eve of the 3rd anniversary of Kyle's passing, after years of legal battles and unanswered grief, the city of Cincinnati agreed to pay $6 million to Kyle's family, the second largest wrongful death settlement in the city's history. But no amount of money could replace a life, a future, or a son. Kyle's death became a benchmark, a painful lesson carved into policy and training manuals. His story now serves as a warning, a reminder that every call matters, every detail matters, and every second can mean the difference between life and death. Some tragedies shock us. Others feel inevitable. The disappearance of Susan Powell in December 2009 falls into the latter. At first glance, it appeared to be another missing persons case. But in truth, it was more like watching a fuse burn in real time, slow, visible, and horrifying, before the explosion finally came. Susan didn't simply vanish. She was erased. Susan Powell was meticulous by nature. She documented her life carefully, Journals, emails, notes. Not because she was paranoid, but because she was afraid. Afraid of what she felt was coming. Afraid of the quiet danger living inside her own home. Her husband, Josh Powell, wasn't outwardly violent. He didn't fit the image people expect. He was socially awkward, emotionally cold, and distant, someone who blended into the background. But those are often the most dangerous individuals. The ones who don't rage. The ones who wait. Josh was controlling, disconnected from reality, and resentful. Susan, meanwhile, carried everything. Raising the children, managing finances, holding the family together while he drifted between jobs. Friends noticed the change in her. She became quieter, smaller, like someone constantly bracing for impact. And then there was Stephen Powell, Josh's father. A presence so disturbing it defied explanation. Stephen was obsessed with Susan in ways that crossed every imaginable boundary. He followed her with a camcorder, filmed her without consent, wrote songs about her, and even spied on her while she showered or changed clothes. Susan felt hunted, watched, trapped. What made it worse was Josh's silence. He knew, and he did nothing. In one chilling journal entry, Susan wrote words that now feel prophetic. If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one. She named Josh directly. This wasn't paranoia. This was intuition sharpened by fear. Susan had begun researching divorce. She was planning an escape. But planning doesn't always mean surviving. On the night of December 6, 2009, Susan was home with her two sons, Charlie, 5, and Braden, just 2 years old. That night marked the final turning point. Josh claimed he took the boys camping, in the middle of the night, during freezing winter temperatures, on a school night. Susan was never seen again. She didn't go with them. She never came back. Some stories end with answers. Others end with lessons. Kyle's story teaches us that systems must listen. Susan's story teaches us that warnings should never be ignored. Both remind us that silence, whether from a dispatcher, a spouse, or a system, can be deadly. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing isn't what we don't know. It's what we were told and failed to act on. The house was still. Too still. Her purse sat on the counter where she always left it. Her phone lay uncharged beside the bed. Her shoes were lined neatly near the door, her coat still hanging where she'd last shrugged it off. Nothing suggested she had planned to leave. Not for an hour, not for a day, not forever. It was as if Susan had simply stepped out of existence. Police arrived later that day for what was supposed to be a routine welfare check. But the moment they crossed the threshold, something felt wrong in a way that couldn't be explained with evidence or reports. There were no overturned chairs, no broken glass, no signs of a struggle, just absence. A hollow, quiet that pressed against the chest. Homes are supposed to feel lived in. This one felt abandoned while still occupied. Hours later, Josh returned with the children. He was calm, unnaturally calm. Most people in his position would be frantic, asking questions, pacing, clinging to hope, breaking down under the weight of uncertainty. Josh did none of that. His voice was flat, his expressions rehearsed. Officers noticed scratches along his hands and neck, thin red marks he dismissed with casual explanations that shifted every time they were repeated. One moment it was an accident, another, rough play, then something else entirely. Details changed, stories bent. The truth never held its shape. The minivan Josh had driven tested positive for blood. It should have been the turning point. But without context, without a body, it became just another unanswered question. Suspicion, no matter how heavy, isn't proof. Then Charlie started talking. Charlie was the older of the two boys. He didn't speak in full narratives. He didn't dramatize. He spoke in fragments, the way children do when they're trying to describe something too big for their minds to process. Mommy followed to the camp. Dad took Mommy somewhere. Mommy didn't come back. Investigators listened carefully. Children are not good liars. Not because they're innocent, but because they don't understand the rules of deception. What Charlie said didn't sound like imagination. It sounded like memory, broken, unpolished, and painfully real. Still, Josh never reacted the way a grieving husband should. There were no tears, no desperation, no moments of collapse. Just cold, mechanical defensiveness. When confronted with inconsistencies, he didn't panic. He withdrew. Without Susan's body, prosecutors were trapped. Josh invoked his right to remain silent and stopped cooperating entirely. Then he did something that felt calculated. He packed up his sons and moved to Washington, far from Utah, far from questions, far from Susan's family. Legally, he was still just the husband of a missing woman. As the investigation continued, another shadow emerged. Josh's father, Stephen Powell. His behavior wasn't just unsettling. It was documented. Videos, journals, songs, pages and pages revealing an obsession with Susan that crossed every boundary of decency. The evidence painted a picture no one wanted to see too clearly. Stephen was eventually arrested, not for Susan's disappearance, but for voyeurism. Even in prison, he clung to the belief that Susan was still alive. He wrote about her, fantasized about her, refused to let go of a woman who was never his to begin with. Time passed. Pressure mounted. Josh, sensing control slipping through his fingers, left behind a digital will. It wasn't a farewell, it was a manifesto. He ranted about betrayal, about money, about power. He framed himself as a victim of persecution. But one message stood out, chilling in its clarity. He would not accept losing his children. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't grief. It was a warning. By 2012, Josh's mental state had visibly deteriorated. He isolated himself, refused psychological evaluations, and cut off anyone who challenged him. The courts ruled that he could only see his sons under supervision. On paper, it sounded safe. In reality, it poured gasoline on a fire already burning. Susan's parents begged the system to listen. They fought tirelessly for custody of their grandsons. They said something terrible was coming. They felt it in their bones. No one moved fast enough. On February 5th, 2012, Josh arrived at his rental house for a supervised visit. The social worker waited outside, a decision that would haunt everyone involved. Josh ushered Charlie and Braden inside. Then, without hesitation, he slammed the door shut and locked it. Within minutes, neighbors heard screaming. Not raised voices, not arguments, screams. Josh attacked his own children with a hatchet. Then, as if ensuring no one could save them, he poured gasoline throughout the house and ignited it. The explosion was so violent it could be felt blocks away. Windows rattled. Flames swallowed the structure in seconds. The social worker called 911, her voice shaking, words tumbling over each other in terror. "He's on a very short lease with DFHS. I smell gasoline." He looked right at me and closed the door. "I'm afraid for their lives." Fire crews arrived, but there was nothing to be done. The house was already gone. Charlie and Braden died from blunt force trauma and smoke inhalation, killed by the one person meant to protect them. Josh died in the fire, he said himself. It was deliberate, calculated, control, even in death. Susan's body was never found, but her story remains, not just as a tragedy, but as a warning about what happens when red flags are ignored, when systems move too slowly, when fear is documented but not acted upon. If there is inspiration here, it lies in this. Listen to children. Take threats seriously. Believe instincts. Protect the vulnerable before it's too late. Because silence doesn't mean safety, and absence doesn't mean nothing happened. Sometimes, it means everything already has. The kids were one step ahead of me. They were only 5 and 7, but somehow, in that terrible moment, they moved faster than I ever could. One second they were right there, small hands gripping mine. The next, Josh Powell slammed the door shut. The sound wasn't loud, but it was final, heavy, permanent. It echoed in my chest in a way no scream ever could. That was the moment the world understood what Susan Powell's parents had known all along. Only after Josh's death did prosecutors finally say it out loud. Only then did the system admit what had been whispered, suspected, and feared for years. Josh Powell murdered Susan Powell. Her body was never found. It never will be. No grave. No remains. Just a woman erased, leaving behind questions that time itself refuses to answer. Susan's parents later sued the state, and they won. Their victory didn't bring their daughter back, but it forced change. It reshaped how child services respond to high-risk domestic violence cases. Policies were rewritten. Procedures were tightened. Future lives may have been saved because of Susan. It was justice, but it came far too late. Growing old follows a similar truth. It arrives quietly, without asking permission, without mercy for timing. No one escapes it. No amount of strength, intelligence, or kindness can stop it. All anyone can do is accept it, adapt to it, and try to keep moving forward, no matter how slowly. At 76 years old, Loretta Pickard understood that better than most. She knew she would never run again, never climb stairs two at a time, never move through the world the way she once had. Her body, once dependable, had become something unfamiliar, fragile, stiff, and unreliable. She was trapped inside it, watching life from behind limitations she never asked for. Loretta lived alone in Lakeland, Florida. Her world had grown small. A walker carried her from room to room. Each step felt calculated, deliberate, painful. Speed was no longer part of her vocabulary. Even on her best days, movement required patience. And on the night her house caught fire, patience was a luxury she did not have. The smell came first. Not flames, not panic, just smoke. Thin, sharp, unmistakable. Loretta didn't freeze. She didn't assume it would pass. She didn't wait to see if it would get better. She picked up the phone and dialed 911. It was November 23, 2018. Loretta had recently undergone hip surgery. She explained that immediately. She told the dispatcher she was alone. She told them she used a walker. She told them, very clearly, that she could not get out by herself. Her voice was steady, controlled. There was no screaming, no chaos. She understood that staying calm was the only control she had left, and she held on to it with everything she had. For nearly 20 minutes, Loretta stayed on the line as smoke crept into every corner of her home. It wrapped around furniture, crawled along ceilings, and filled her lungs one breath at a time. Each inhale burned. Each exhale felt shorter than the last. The dispatcher reassured her again and again, help is coming. And then, sirens. Distant at first, then closer, louder, real. For a moment, hope cut through the fear. Loretta allowed herself to believe that she might survive, that she might walk away with nothing more than smoke in her hair and a story to tell. Her voice cracked just once. They know I'm in here, right? She asked. Then, softer, almost a whisper. They're coming for me, aren't they? Firefighters arrived while Loretta was still alive. They were right outside her home, fully equipped, trained, ready. This was what they had prepared for. This was what they existed to do. And yet, no one went in. For approximately 8 minutes, fire crews stood outside while Loretta remained inside the burning house. 8 minutes where smoke thickened. 8 minutes where oxygen disappeared. 8 minutes where survival slipped further out of reach. Loretta was still on the phone, still conscious, still waiting. She listened to the sounds outside, radios, movement, muffled voices, and held onto them like lifelines. She believed they would reach her. She trusted the system. She trusted that someone, somewhere, knew she was still alive. But fires do not wait.